destroys a Russian FSB base with a deep dive. It then blows up a bridge in Kherson. In Zaporizhia, it pierces an underground headquarters with a JDAMER. These are just a small part of the dozens of operations carried out by the MiG-29 in Ukraine in recent months. And one of these fighter jets may belong to Azerbaijan. Yes, you heard correctly. This is an Azerbaijani MiG-29 jet that may be serving in the Ukrainian Air Force. Evidence has emerged that Ukraine has reinforced its MiG-29 Fulcrum fighter jet fleet, which it has been working on intensively, with reinforcements from a somewhat surprising source, Azerbaijan. A photo that has recently begun circulating on social media shows a single-seat Ukrainian Air Force MiG-29 aircraft with a distinctive camouflage pattern combining the blue, grey and purple-grey tones used by Azerbaijan. The fighter jet's camouflage is identical to that of the Azerbaijani Air Force. It appears that the aircraft is equipped with medium-range R-27, AA-10 Alamo, and short-range R-73, AA-11 Archer, air-to-air missiles for combat missions. As of February 24, 2022, 3 MiG-29 aircraft belonging to the Azerbaijani Air Force are undergoing repair and modernization at the Lviv State Aircraft Repair Plant in western Ukraine. While their subsequent fate remains uncertain, some claim they were destroyed as a result of Russian attacks. However, it has now emerged that at least one is operational. Evidence of an old Azerbaijani MiG-29 aircraft being used in Ukraine has emerged at a time of heightened tension between Azerbaijan and Russia. Moreover, Azerbaijan has recently been increasingly vocal in its support for Ukraine. This is because problems with its longtime geographical ally Russia have been increasing. Tensions between Azerbaijan and Russia escalated in the summers of 2024 and 2025. Amidst the rising tensions, Russia bombed Azerbaijani facilities in Ukraine in August 2025. This was perhaps the last straw for Azerbaijan. So how can we arrive at this conclusion? Ukraine started the war with approximately 50 MiG-29s assigned to 2 regiments. Ukraine also acquired around 25 MiGs from Poland and Slovakia. According to the Oryx open source monitoring group, it has been confirmed that 31 Ukrainian MiG-29s have been destroyed since the start of the current conflict, with more damaged. The actual number is almost certainly higher. In other words, the number of damaged, out of service and completely destroyed aircraft appears to be quite high. In this case, it would not be wrong to assume that Ukraine has about a dozen MiG-29s left. This shows that each MiG-29 is very valuable. This also suggests that the Ukrainian Air Force may have managed to salvage at least one of the Azerbaijani MiG-29s at the Lviv factory and put it into active service. The fact that tensions between Russia and Azerbaijan have reached very high levels and that Azerbaijan has increased its support for Ukraine also increases the possibility that a secret agreement has been made between Ukraine and Azerbaijan regarding the aforementioned MiG-29. Previously, there had been reports that at least some MiG-29s belonging to Azerbaijan had been donated to Ukraine or had entered Ukrainian service in some other way. In the summer of 2022, the @Caucasus War account on Twitter published a photo showing 3 Azerbaijani MiG-29 aircraft undergoing repairs at the state-owned Lviv State Aviation Repair Facility in Ukraine. The aircraft appear to have been stranded in Ukraine after the extensive invasion and then passed into Ukrainian control. It appears that the aircraft, or at least one of them, survived a Russian attack on the Lviv State Aviation Repair Facility in March 2022, which we reported on at the time. The Lviv facility was a priority target for Russia because it was the only facility in the country capable of performing large-scale maintenance on MiG-29s. In addition to servicing Fulcrum aircraft for the Ukrainian Air Force, the facility also provided services to foreign customers, including Azerbaijan, in the past. It is not yet clear whether Azerbaijan's MiG-29s were donated to Kyiv, sold, or simply seized and put into service. It is also unclear whether other examples were painted with Ukrainian camouflage to conceal their former identities. However, there is also speculation that Azerbaijan may have provided Ukraine with other unofficial support in the form of precision-guided bombs, 82mm mortars, and fuel. Interestingly, Azerbaijan's MiG-29 fleet originated in Ukraine. Let's look at the factors that bring Azerbaijan closer to Ukraine here. Earlier this summer, the arrest of dozens of ethnic Azerbaijanis in Russia, followed by their beating and the loss of at least 2 lives, sparked a significant reaction in Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan immediately increased its security measures against Russia. There are now signs that Azerbaijan is looking for a way to distance itself from Moscow and forge ties elsewhere. The cold winds between the country's leaders were also felt at this week's Shanghai summit. The move that triggered this situation and brought Azerbaijan closer to Ukraine, as mentioned earlier, was Russia's targeting of the facilities of the state oil company of Azerbaijan Republic in Ukraine. Moscow has targeted SOCAR's fuel terminal in Ukraine's Odesa city twice in 2 weeks. The attacks, carried out on August 8th and 18th, go far beyond a routine infrastructure strike. The statement from Ukraine following the second attack was harsh. This is not just an attack on a facility, it is a direct attack on our relations with Azerbaijan and on regional energy security. The Kremlin, as usual, resorted to its familiar tactic: silence. No official statement was made about the target, and the public was left in the dark. However, the data points we have paint a different picture. The fact that the target was Azerbaijani-owned turns Russia's message into a diplomatic attack. Putting the timeline in place helps to set the tone. After the first attack on August 8th, a fire broke out at the SOCAR facility in Odesa, and 2 different industry sources confirmed the damage. 10 days later, a second wave of similar attacks hit, and storage areas were once again engulfed in flames. The Odesa area is not merely a storage map, it is a network connected to the nerve centers of Black Sea trade, and its vulnerability is determined by the rhythms at sea and along the coast. Energy facilities and land-based fuel distribution points are targeted in the same night, the defense zone expands, and saturation becomes easier. The Ukrainian leadership emphasized intent this time and wrote that Baku must respond legally and diplomatically. Images from the field showed large-scale fuel fires and prolonged efforts to extinguish them. This incident was part of a broader night in which drone swarms targeted fuel and energy infrastructure in the Odesa region. Damage was also reported to port infrastructure along the same line, disrupting regional shipping rhythms. As contacts intensify between Kyiv and Baku, Moscow's answer to the question, "Who will foot the bill?" becomes clearer. The method of attack and the profile of the targets also reinforce the tone of the message. To understand the addressee of the message from the Kremlin, one must examine the source of the tension between Baku and Moscow. In the summer of 2025, the criminal investigations launched by Baku after the Special Forces raid in Yekaterinburg on June 27th, which targeted ethnic Azerbaijanis and led to allegations of deaths and torture, escalated the diplomatic crisis between the two capitals. According to global media analysis, this incident brought the erosion of trust, which began with the crash of flight AZAL-8243 in December 2024, for which Russian air defense was held responsible, to a new threshold. Recent reports indicate that reciprocal steps, including the operation on the office of Russian state media Sputnik in Baku, have brought relations to an unusually tense stage. The assessment of these reports emphasize that the Azerbaijani leadership is using its increasingly harsh rhetoric toward the Kremlin to score points both domestically and internationally, while creating room for maneuver without severing economic ties. Academic assessments point out that for lasting peace to be achieved, Russia's attempts to establish control mechanisms along the line of contact have been rejected, and that the new order must generate regional legitimacy. The warning of an unprecedented escalation presents a backdrop of declining trust in Russia among the Azerbaijani public and a buildup of coercive incidents. Details of Sputnik Azerbaijan's operation show that a mutual symbolic threshold has been crossed, and that the media sphere has also been drawn into the crisis. Furthermore, the global media's comprehensive coverage of this situation implies that Moscow has been pushed out of the game. The Russian side has turned this pressure into a persistent rhythm at storage and supply nodes. Ukraine is countering these waves with layered air defense, firefighting logistics reflexes, and distributed storage. However, 2 consecutive hits on a foreign-owned facility are generating the perception that the battlefield is expanding in formal risk assessments. This perception is directly reflected in insurance pricing and time costs in port road connections. As time costs increase, the field value of the same liter diverges from its real-world shipment value. The diverging curves make storage transportation decisions more cautious, with the priority shifting to least risky arrival. Therefore, the military move is not only causing a fire on the ground, but also making the entire energy sector more expensive. Why did Russia specifically target SOCAR? SOCAR's presence in Ukraine, with approximately 60 stations, is a visible lever at a time when the US, EU, and regional banks are redesigning their insurance and supply models under the threat of war. It is known that a test shipment of Azerbaijani gas to Ukraine via the Trans Balkan pipeline was conducted at the end of July, and the two leaders expressed their intention to expand cooperation during a phone call at the beginning of August. The targeting of the August 8th and 18 attacks at the operator in this context was not merely an attempt to disrupt supplies, but an effort to sever the supply policy link. The official line in Kyiv indicated that the attacks were intended to harm Azerbaijan's interests, and that Baku should respond diplomatically and legally. The message that SOCAR-Ukraine cooperation will not derail showed that the political dimension of the attack was as significant as its economic dimension. The visibility of this link in the Odesa region turned the operator into a target and tested deterrence in the same place. The second strike strengthened the claim of intimidation and prompted decision-makers in Baku to ask, is the cost of our presence in Ukraine increasing? In short, the location of the target was as much a part of the message as its name. This framework also makes the timing of the attack understandable. The second layer is the diplomatic realignment in the Caucasus and Washington's mediation. On August 8th, the signing of a framework peace agreement between the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan at the White House, with US mediation, challenged Moscow's classic narrative of influence in the region. The Kremlin responded to the agreement with satisfaction and caution in its public statements, drawing attention to foreign interference. In the days that followed, a draft text and set of principles were published, emphasizing respect for sovereignty and borders and outlining a path to normalization. From Moscow's perspective, this means that the near-abroad doctrine is being confined to a narrower area. One way to compensate for the loss of leverage is to send low-cost signals to third countries on the ground. Foreign operator strikes, such as the SOCAR facility in Ukraine, fall into this category of signals. The phrase, "you signed a peace agreement but regional risks are still in Russia's hands," burns in fuel depots on the ground. Such a signal is not directed at Baku alone, but also at Baku's new security and economic partners. Thus, the flames in Odesa shed light on the chessboard in the Caucasus. The echoes of the attacks on the insurance and financial risk front reveal the invisible front of the war. War risk premiums along the Black Sea route surged multiple times during the 2023 to 2024 period, with partial normalization achieved in 2025 through public support schemes. Programs established by the Ukrainian government with Lloyd's and intermediary institutions expanded coverage to non-grain cargoes and increased per-voyage guarantees. However, international reinsurance appetite for fixed assets, particularly energy facilities, remained limited, and prices could rise to unsustainable levels without public guarantees. Every terminal hit on such nights turns seemingly small premium differences into tangible costs within weeks. Insurers update their post-event risk maps, may add new restrictions to the Odessa-Izmail-Reni triangle, and expand policy exclusions. War risk guarantees established by the EBRD and similar actors for land transport and stock guarantees provide some breathing room for movable assets, but fixed energy facilities remain excluded. This imbalance directly affects foreign operators' investment appetite and security investments in the field. In short, a single night's fire means months of price differences and contract revisions. Energy diplomacy and the insurance economy become intertwined in such moments. Another layer is the circulation of the rapid and victorious SVO against Azerbaijan rhetoric in Russian media and commentary circles. This rhetoric serves not to deter Baku, but rather to convey the message to Moscow's domestic audience that we are still in control. However, if this rhetoric is not backed up by low-cost proxy messages on the ground, it will quickly fade away. Foreign operators in Odessa will fill the void. Analytical articles from Ukrainian sources have interpreted the recent attacks on SOCAR and gas infrastructure in conjunction with this rhetoric. Commentators argue that the diplomatic shift has irritated Moscow and that strikes that appear to be punishment in the field have become a means of communication. This is also a risk analysis, as misread signals could trigger a chain escalation. Nevertheless, a direct military adventure against Azerbaijani territory is irrational given Russia's current force distribution and diplomatic isolation. Therefore, the hit the operator line remains in the low-cost, high-noise category. Propaganda rhetoric continues to flow at varying intensities. When the field calendar and media language are read together, the picture becomes clearer. This strategy is more suited to sending a stay cautious message than aiming to create a break in direct Azerbaijan-Russia relations. The targeting of foreign operators in the Ukraine theater also shifts the legal debate to the Kyiv-Baku axis and multiplies contract risk headlines. From Moscow's perspective, the cost is low. It offers ample room for strategic rhetoric. While Kyiv's language emphasizes intent, Baku seeks to limit the damage with a message that cooperation continues. Considering the peace framework under Washington's mediation, this message also conveys to the US that the region is still risky. The repetition of attacks accompanied by silent diplomacy is a reflex to make sure the message is heard. It is clear that this reflex could backfire, as foreign investors will raise their risk premiums and Azerbaijan's balance of power policy could shift towards seeking more Western support. In short, this method, which is effective in the short term, could have a pushback effect in the medium term. The choice of the Odesa area is rational due to its logistical accessibility and political visibility. However, rationality does not work according to the agenda of one side alone. The question of what Azerbaijan will do next follows two separate paths: diplomacy and technical security. On the diplomatic front, notes, protests, and legal initiatives are the first steps, and special protocols can be developed with Ukrainian authorities to ensure the protection of the foreign operator. On the technical front, facility security, distribution, backup of critical functions, and strengthening fire risk prevention with independent sensors and automation come into play. Narrowing special exemptions in the insurance market and seeking public guarantees are also on the table. SOCAR's statement that cooperation continues is backed up by such concrete security investments and policy revisions. It is also necessary to tell the domestic audience in Baku that we will compensate for the loss, which may involve recalibrating the scale of operations in Ukraine. Joint risk management packages with US and EU institutions can be discussed. These packages also have a political cost. However, as the cost of the Odesa nights increases, they come to the fore among rational options. On the legal front, the claim of intent can be tested in international forums. This also creates an indirect means of pressure on Moscow. Ukraine's response will take shape in two areas: military technical and economic. In the military technical arena, civilian military solutions such as short-range air defense, night vision thermal sensor networks, and fire early warning systems around Odesa can be strengthened. In the economic arena, drone pressure on Russian refineries and terminal networks is expected to continue as part of counter-deterrence measures. This has already been seen repeatedly throughout the summer and has had economic impacts on Russia's refinery capacity. The energy-for-energy response maintains a symbolic balance and creates bargaining power at the negotiating table. However, this also carries insurance and retaliation risks, and each strike could affect premiums along the Odesa-Mykolaiv line. Therefore, it would not be surprising if Kyiv expands its insurance programs and increases public guarantees. The distribution of small warehouse facilities around energy and port areas, and the reduction of infiltration effects through false targets are also expected steps. These steps come at a cost, but they are necessary during the winter preparation period. Countermeasures targeting Russia's economic network will determine the balance on the ground. The US and NATO line will seek to provide flexibility in the short term through air defense and insurance architecture. War risk guarantees established for Ukraine's sea and land transport have been expanded to cover non-grain cargoes. The budget for such programs could be increased. Meanwhile, there is a donation campaign for Ukraine by United 24 in the video description. If you want to take part in the fight for freedom, we are waiting for your support.